I'd like to introduce Joel Hansen first. So if you don't know him already, he is a business development manager at Skidmore Group. He's a LinkedIn youth editor and regular speaker on the topics of marketing, personal branding, and he has done a TED Talk in the past. He has had the privilege to partner with global brands, including Uber, Amazon, Slack, BuzzFeed, Hootsuite, David's Tea, and is inspired to see the impact an organization can have when a brand story empowers their audience. On LinkedIn, he's produced content and he's garnered 20 plus million views, with some stories gaining 1 million plus impressions alone. He has notably been recognized by Daily Hive as one of Vancouver's top 30 influencers in tech, and featured by GoDaddy and Etiquette and Forbes. So welcome, Joel, to the call. I'd like to also welcome Natalie today. She is a 3-time LinkedIn top voice and helps to lead content marketing at 500 startups, one of the largest and most followed venture capital firms globally. In 2015, she was the youngest recipient of LinkedIn's Top Voice Award and would go on to cultivate an audience of over 400,000 around entrepreneurship, content strategy, social impact, leadership, and more. She has spoken at 25 plus events on content marketing, personal branding, and LinkedIn strategy. And she's been featured in Inc., Adweek, and more. So thank you joining us, Natalie, from Southern California. Great to have you on the call.
Great to be here.
Awesome. All right. So yeah, let's get into some questions here. Feel free to jump in when you want. First question is just after graduating university for both you guys, what steps did you guys take to get where you are today? And did you have any key individuals to help you on your way?
You want to start, Natalie?
Sure. So I think the question is interesting because I don't think when I graduated there was an initial shift due to graduation. I think I started well before graduation when it came to taking steps to get me to where I am today. I think some of the pivotal ones that really stick out in my mind are when I started writing on LinkedIn. That actually happened, I believe, my freshman year, or like just after my freshman year at college. So that I started very early on in terms of starting my own sense of like personal brand. I started to create content. Basically, I started, building this resume slash almost like my own little journal of all the things that I could say I could speak to, right? So if I wanted an internship in something, I'd write an article about it, and I'd do all this research, and then I would talk about the article in my interview a lot of times. And so I think that was maybe one of the pivotal ones in terms of like moments. But one that was maybe closer to my graduation was when I had my last internship. So my last internship was at an entertainment company here in LA. And what I did was I actually created an Excel spreadsheet of all of the employees at the company. And made it a point to have a follow-up section. This is when I had my coffee meeting. This is when I was able to work on one of their projects. And so I got to meet essentially the whole company. It was about 150 people. And that ultimately led me to meeting the CEO, which by that time I had built up a personal following. I had written for Variety, Startup Grind, a couple other publications. And when I got to meet the CEO, he kind of sat me down and he was like, "Why are you our intern? Like, why are you doing this if you have already proven yourself?" Which I think that's kind of been a little bit of a superpower. And I think Joel also has this of like a humbled confidence. So coming in, doing a lot of the work, making sure that you're executing, but also never feeling like you're above anything. You end up meeting great people that way if you come in with sort of that humbled confidence. So I think, being able to do those things where I was executing, I was building on throughout college led to me then when I graduated, I was able to have a repertoire to show people and to be able to prove some of the skills that I wanted. And then in terms of like people, That's a really good question. I think that some of my mentors in college, specifically that were women, really helped me understand the concepts of like, these are like very basic concepts, but very important around like negotiating my first salary, or the idea of going for the role that I want, not necessarily just all assistant roles, which is very common in Hollywood. If you go into entertainment, you're told go into an assistant role. I did not go into an assistant role. I actually went to a role that was not an entry-level role because of that. So I think having good mentors like that really understand kind of your goals and your drive ultimately helped me to push myself to, do things that got me where I am today.
Great. Joel.
That's a tough act to follow. I think one that hits home probably with this particular webinar and the people listening was, I remember I was in my first or second year at university, and I messaged this university alumni that was a business founder, and I just found him on LinkedIn, and I sent him a message and just kind of curious about what he was doing and what he was working on. And I saw that he went to our university. And I remember I had this first kind of phone call through LinkedIn of this business guy I'd never met before in person, but he took the time of day to say, hey, what's up? How's it going? How are studies? And to me, that kind of rings off as a light bulb moment of the first realization that we're able to connect, chat, and kind of have a dialogue with people that we've never met before, and people outside of our community of friends and family are willing to step up and say, yeah, let's chat. That was one moment for sure. And then I think the second one was I had a friend in the marketing space who owned a digital marketing agency, and he was selling a conference to another marketing company. And then he put my name in when he was selling the conference to say, you should ask Joel to see if he can help plan the conference. And I was in my fourth year of university, and the biggest event I'd probably planned was maybe 100 or 200 people. And having that experience to kind of jump into the conference was called CIMC, pushed me outside of my comfort zone and just reminded me of what you can do when you have, mentors beside you that are willing to not only support you, but kind of help provide resources and advice to help that idea come through to fruition. And that was something I was able to do before I graduated, which just kind of helped build that relationship building and that confidence I think that Natalie pointed out to. And then the last one I think would just be their professors. I think when you take the time to get to know your professors, you have to understand that they are there because they have a love to teach, right? Most of them, I think. And so make sure that you're tapping into why they're there. And if you can go outside of just the class hours, I think there's so much hidden value of who they are as people, who they are as business professionals, because a lot of them have consulting projects on the side. So that would be my third one, of just getting to know those professors that are friendly and asking their advice because they're there for a reason.
Absolutely. Yeah. You can't discount the role of the professor for sure. So yeah, let's get into some talk around LinkedIn. So for one, just starting off on the platform, what is LinkedIn? What are some common features? What are some kickstart sort of tips that you could give students in starting off? And really, there's this premium program that we hear of. Is that worth purchasing? Either one of you guys can start off.
Joel, it's your turn to start.
Okay. I never had premium as a student, and I think you should only get it if you, I think, have a goal that you're trying to strive for, whether that's, you're applying for a job, or you've just been hired as an intern and you can maybe ask your company to help pay for it. I think you should have a goal associated with doing it, not just doing it to say I have this badge, because at the end of the day, your ideas and your content should shine through, not this LinkedIn badge that says, hey, I paid $30 a month to have this badge. That's kind of my take. And then on the other note, for people that don't know what LinkedIn is, Natalie will definitely jump into this, but I think it's the most underutilized relationship building platform in the world. Not many people know, but I think 4 years ago, it was acquired by Microsoft for about, I think, 28 billion. And that's quite a big price tag for Microsoft to say, we think LinkedIn has this much value. We're going to buy them, being one of the most important tech companies in the world, and we're going to build this into an incredible resource for the whole globe. And the fascinating thing about LinkedIn is that with over 600 million users, they have so much important data on not only the working professional world, but how developing countries are growing, where there might be gaps in terms of sectors and industry for talent and things like that. So my challenge to you guys is figure out what you want to do with your professional life and also your personal life, and then just kind of start to test things out on the platform and get comfortable with trying out different ideas, and also just using it to listen. You don't always need to be posting the most amazing ideas. I think, like in any relationship, if you're there to listen and if you're there to take down information and learn from mentors, LinkedIn is full of the top people and professionals in the world. And if you're able to take 10 to 30 minutes a day and tailor it to what you want, I think that's where a lot of the fun comes along.
Great.
Absolutely. Kind of just to add to that, I think the way I would kind of describe LinkedIn is it's kind of this social media platform for everything doing with advancing your career. So you can apply to jobs through LinkedIn, you can connect to people through LinkedIn. Some people, will sell their products or services over LinkedIn, but it's entirely career oriented, which makes it obviously very apropos for this conversation about advancing your career. But I think a lot of students view it, or at least back when I was a campus editor at LinkedIn for USC, a lot of students just viewed it as like this job searching platform. Like you just find jobs on it, you apply to jobs. You can do that on LinkedIn. That is one of the features. But I think if people broaden sort of their perspective of it as well, it's also, when you apply to a job, or also when you are working with somebody on a project. This is something that now that I'm a couple of years out of college, I really noticed. When I'm working with somebody else on a project that's external for my company, the first thing I do is look at their LinkedIn. When I am sort of vetting different people to work with as freelancers, as contractors, first thing I do is look at their LinkedIn. It's basically your reputation in the business world. So as such, I don't necessarily treat it as a resume. That's the other big thing, is a lot of people look at their profile and they're like, this is just like my resume. There are certain aspects to it that will be similar. So you'll want to talk about your experience. You'll want to make it short and sweet like you would a resume. But it really is so much more than that. You're able to link, you're able to embed videos, you're able to showcase presentations, talk about volunteering projects. So something that I did at my university is a lot of my classes, we would actually do consulting projects with companies outside of the class. So one of the classes was growth hacking. I was able to do a project with a company, I think they were called Discotech. I don't even know if they're still around, but regardless, I actually had that as one of my experiences on my LinkedIn that I may not put on my resume just for sake of space. But on LinkedIn, I'm able to, and I'm able to actually include the presentations that I was using. So I think, for students, really broadening their perspective of not only is LinkedIn somewhere you can apply to jobs, but it's also somewhere that you can really build up your reputation.
Absolutely. Yeah. One of the things that you said there in your response was it's sort of like a resume, but not really. One of the things that is on a LinkedIn profile is the bio of the person. I'm just curious, Natalie, in your perspective, is that supposed to be something that's more formal on hey, you're just the skills, or is it is it more of a personal type of note there in the bio?
I love this question because it was the number one question I got when I was a campus editor at USC, because people would go to the summary section and they're like, is this a cover letter? Like, what am I supposed to put here? The old format that the LinkedIn editors used to tell students to use, first of all, to answer your question of like formal versus informal, it's whatever your industry is. So I used to say always be informal, but some industries that's not actually apropos. So if you're going to become a lawyer per se, you don't want to have a very informal summary. It should always though be in first person. We know you're writing that summary. There's no point in talking in third person. And it allows for people to know that you're the person behind the profile. So if I go out and reach out to you and message you, I know exactly who I'm talking to. But going back to what we used to tell students, the easiest way to format a summary is one of two ways. One is to do a few sentences on your past. So how did you get interested in what you're currently studying? A few sentences about your present. So are you part of any student clubs? Do you have any internships? And a couple of sentences about what you're looking for. And that's really important. And a lot of students skip that. So if you're interested in certain internships, if you want to move cities, this is really great because it'll go into the keyword search on recruiters' back end. So they'll actually say, if they're recruiting for somebody in San Francisco, which is where I usually live, if you have San Francisco, not necessarily in your current location, but in your summary, you'll still come up on those searches. So past, present, and future, or if you don't necessarily have a lot of experience, so if you're maybe, first or second year, you can also do what I sort of coined passion plus execution. So what are you really passionate about? Even if you think that might change in the future, what really sparks your interest and you're able to show personality, and how are you currently executing and wanting to execute on that more in the future? That way you're still able to show your personality.
Yeah, that's great. I'm still tweaking my profile up a bit. I need to do that. So moving on. So just for those new or veterans at LinkedIn, what are some things to keep in mind when making posts? And as a student, what should we be looking at to post? It's an interesting platform because it's not like Instagram, it's not like Facebook, it's a bit more oriented to business. So what are some things that could be key to keep in mind? So I'll throw it up to Joel again to start off.
Yeah, I recently scrolled down all the way to my first LinkedIn post, and it was a link, I think, to an organizational behavior article, and it had one like, no caption, and I think that was 4 years ago. So I just want to preface that story with, it's okay to not know what you're doing and to not have it all together. Because I remember starting out to post, there's this vulnerability and there's this kind of weird feeling of, well, is the whole professional world going to judge me as soon as I say something? And know that that's not going to happen. And know that you can kind of only go upwards. I think people think you're going to stoop down right away, but it's as soon as you start, you can only go upwards, I think. And just encouraging that, testing ideas and using it almost as a journal and as a documentation tool, rather than this magical article that needs to go viral every single post. Starting off, I think as a student, you're in that unknown territory because you don't have a career role. But I think what you do have that Natalie mentioned is each of you on this call have a unique background and perspective and certain classes and ideas that you're already kind of so far along on. And I think I'd encourage you to not necessarily become an industry leader, but just start facilitating conversations and questions and topics that you're interested in, rather than needing to always prove a point to the LinkedIn world. So that could look like, asking for advice about a particular topic you're interested in, or you could share an article from another LinkedIn user or an industry leader and share your thoughts as a student. And I think if you get in that habit of facilitating a dialogue, like a two-way conversation, rather than always needing to come up with your own original content, I think that's a great way to start. And then in terms of, I guess, the tactical approach, I'd say if you can just get in a habit of posting once a week and have another friend hold you accountable, that's a great way to start. So if you're finishing this call and you haven't done anything before, grab someone else that was in the call and say, hey, let's each check in next week and let's try and do one post about what we've learned working remote or studying remote, and make it a new challenge each week so that at least you're building progress and you're having someone hold you accountable.
Absolutely. Yeah. Natalie, do you have anything to add?
I mean, Joel like hit the nail on the head. I feel like this is why I like doing these events with Joel, because we're like so aligned in like how we view things. I would just further emphasize this idea that you don't have to prove anything to anybody. I remember some of the LinkedIn posts that have done the worst for me are moments where I felt like I had to like back up all my claims with all this research, and like it just became really convoluted and not easy to understand. And at the end of the day, like people don't expect you to know exactly. Like you probably have student or intern or some, you know, relatively entry level title in your headline. But joining the conversation is incredibly useful for your career later on. At the end of the day, your goal should be, you know, connecting with people, not necessarily like proving anything to anybody right now. So just want to further that point. I think that's one of the things that I've also had sort of a downfall in the past that I wish somebody would have told me earlier.
Yeah.
I was going to say, I have one more other thing to add. I think something that Natalie did really well when she was a student, and I tried to do similarly, was when you're a student, you don't represent a company or a brand. And as soon as you do take a job or you're in your career, you represent that brand. And that brand can have social media policies. They could have certain things that you don't want to say, and they can close your ability to storytell. So my encouragement to you guys is students have this magical charm, no jokes, that when you reach out to people, people want to help because they know you don't have an agenda. They know you're not trying to steal information. They know you're just an innocent student trying to figure out your career. And my kind of, I guess, weekly challenge was, what random person can I reach out to learn from or to hear from, just to see if they'd respond? Because you have this student charm while you're in these first couple of years. As soon as you become a professional, you kind of lose that, and people know, okay, are you trying to sell me something? Are you trying to join my company? So just bask in that charm, use it as much as you can, and understand that you don't always have to prove something, and you can just tell your story.
Yeah, that's great. I think reaching out to professionals has definitely been something that I've been trying to work on, and sort of getting over that initial awkward stage of just sort of knowing that, you know, they know you're a student and you're just wanting to learn more. And that's really, you know, how the platform can be viewed. That's huge. Anyways, yeah, moving on. And one of the topics of this call was just navigating the uncertainty of the job search at this time. So I'm curious to know, so LinkedIn, they have a job search feature, but then also there's other websites like Indeed, the company website itself. During this time, you know, for a student who's looking for an internship or full-time, what, like, does LinkedIn, is that the best platform to be searching for these jobs, or is it more of a combination? Natalie, you want to start us off?
Sure. So in terms of getting a full-time position or an internship, I still think LinkedIn is probably the best platform for that. It's very easy to apply. You're able to connect your LinkedIn to any application that you're doing, so on and so forth. They also are one of the most like populated job search platforms in terms of companies use them regularly. There's almost anything you find on Indeed, you'll be able to find on LinkedIn. That being said, one of the pieces of advice that I kind of give people is to diversify what experience means during this time. So experience does not have to be a formal internship or a full-time job. Experience can also be volunteering at one of the COVID-19 efforts, in whatever you're good at, right? So I have a friend who's really good at data science. She's a computer science major. Her internship was canceled. She's still in college. And so what she actually ended up doing is she joined one of the efforts that is now doing data science research on the COVID-19 cases. So she's still getting very relevant experience to what she wants to do, but she's no longer thinking, if I don't have a full-time internship, if I don't, work at a reputable company, that I'm not being successful. We kind of have to take that away right now in terms of that being success. And honestly, I think that should always be taken away. I look back at a lot of the experiences I had in college. A lot of them were not like formal offers. They were like me helping out somebody or me, doing a project here and there. Joel and I have done a number of projects in college together that I view as equally, impactful to my experience. But to get back to your question, I think LinkedIn is a great platform for applying to those jobs, but even more so for reaching out to people who may be leading those projects, maybe leading, different initiatives that you can also join. So that's a little bit separate from just the job searching platform that you're able to utilize LinkedIn for.
Yeah, absolutely. Joel, you have?
Yeah, I'll take a different swing because I think Natalie definitely addressed the key points. I would say in this day and age, the resume kind of print off, drop off at the office, it's become obsolete, right? We're no longer printing off resumes. We're no longer, at some companies developing those cover letters. And I think the new resume process is kind of our, what we stand for as people. And that can easily be seen in our content feeds. Whether that's, Instagram or for this one, LinkedIn. I think the untapped resource that LinkedIn has to offer is that to get a job, you need to build relationship and rapport with whoever is the recruiter or hiring manager. And LinkedIn gives you so many avenues to essentially tell a story that then that content would build those relationships. And I think that's the competitive advantage that LinkedIn has that Indeed doesn't. You can't build a relationship on Indeed. You can only apply and get the job or get rejected. And the thing that LinkedIn has is that you're building relationships with job managers without ever applying. And you're able to then have these opportunities pulled to you because you've just shown up as a professional that is trustworthy. And I think that's a mind shift that students need to understand, is that in the digital world we live in, we're able to build relationships and get jobs without ever having to drop off a resume. And I think that's just an important distinction to make.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd also like to just mention and ask you, Joel, again. When we were chatting last week about this call, you mentioned that during this time, the reality is that a lot of students can create their own internship per se. You want to expand on that? What does that exactly mean?
Totally. Just what Natalie was saying. I think the internship model, again, isn't a yes or no process, right? It's an internship, and a job is showcasing that you have value and credibility and that you provided results to something or someone. And if you can get those three things in an internship bucket from a company of 10 or 100 people, there's no saying that if you get rejected, you can't take that same opportunity and just make it on your own and apply it to something that you're passionate about. So what Natalie said about that internship getting denied, that data scientist had great skills, and they were able to apply that to COVID-19 efforts. And I think I'd encourage you on the call to document, okay, what skills do I have to give? What is my dream internship, and how can I kind of engineer an opportunity within my friend and family network? Or possibly kind of LinkedIn message people to say, hey, you know, I just lost my internship, but I have these skills to give. Would you want to connect for a call to see if you guys might want to collaborate on some sort of internship? And on the receiving end, companies right now, it might be a little crazy, but it's hard to turn down initiative and a great idea. And it's a great relationship builder, even if they can't say yes to the internship right away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's fantastic. I think like underlooking this time, or just to use it to capitalize on what you can, like show independence. I think that's something that we can all, you know, capitalize on as students. Yeah. So moving on, next question here. So when reaching out to people on LinkedIn, using the chat feature, what are some best ways to use this? I know, I think both of you guys mentioned this in one of our previous questions, but that is sort of a channel where professionals are, they sort of know your intention behind it. But sometimes it takes a bit more editing to understand, okay, how should I frame this? Yeah, I guess, yeah, we can start off. Natalie, you want to start us off?
I'm actually going to hand it to Joel, only because he has a Canadian charm that I do not have.
Can you repeat it one more time, Cole? Because
yeah, sure.
I was thinking Natalie was going to answer it, so I was kind of zoning.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah,
it's an honest place.
It's just the etiquette to use when reaching out to professionals. They understand that you have a particular reason potentially to reach out to them. Mm-hmm. What are some most effective ways to reach out to a professional?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, be as personal as you can. Always address, you know, them by name, and then secondly, you always want to contextualize why you're reaching out to them. If you saw them in a news press, if you saw them in the LinkedIn feed, if you saw another friend had interacted with their post, mention those things, and that really shows the humanness of who you are. And then the third part of that would be have kind of a clear ask or a core reason of why you're reaching out. And it doesn't need to always be to get a job. And hopefully you should never start with that. But if you can add, you know, let's say Vanessa works in marketing. She's a marketing manager and she works in Vancouver. I would reach out and say, hey, Vanessa, I noticed your post because I saw you were just on a CT News interview. I noticed you're a marketing manager at a local agency. And as a marketing student myself, I'd love to connect to learn more about how your agency's navigating kind of COVID-19 right now. And as soon as she sees that, she knows, okay, this person's reaching out for this reason. This is how they found me. And why would I say no to that if it's a valuable human connection? So in that invitation, you really just want to validate why they should connect with you. And the more human you can be, I think the better. The last thing I was going to note is that when people see, I'm just pulling up LinkedIn here. When you reach out to someone, they typically will look at your profile. And so is make the first 3 inches of your profile as human as possible, so that when someone reaches out to you, like say it's Vanessa, and Vanessa sees my invitation, she can see, oh, okay, Joel's got a recognizable face. He lives in Vancouver. He's working at this company. And right away, you're building trust with her before she's ever met you in person. And so if you're sending an invitation, make sure your profile's complete so that they can actually vet you out as a person before meeting this random ghost kind of thing. So those are my tips from the Canadian Charm. Natalie, what do you have to say?
Yeah, it's perfect. The only thing I would add is, and this is from a recent experience. So I was recently hiring for an intern at 500. And so I made a post about the fact that I was hiring for an intern. And lo and behold, I had over 100 students message me, ask me if they could have 15 minutes of my time. I don't have that many minutes to give. So I think, definitely everything Joel said, but I think one of the pitfalls that I see students do a lot is they'll immediately message, like within the introduction message, hey, can we get on a 15-minute call? It's a little early to be asking for their time, especially if they've posted anything about recruiting. They're going to be on calls with people probably constantly, just trying to interview. So just something to be mindful if you are, actively searching and connecting with people that are recruiting. Be mindful of the fact that they may not have 15 minutes, but they're more than welcome. You're more than welcome to ask them, a specific question like the one that Joel talked about in terms of, how your business is, changing due to COVID-19. That's something that I would have totally answered. And that was a great way to put it.
And then I have one other thing. The other point I love to mention is the world is so short on encouragement and positivity, and use LinkedIn as a tool just to encourage people. Like, you don't always have to ask to get on a call, to get a job, to, like my post. Just reach out, recognize who they are, and just encourage them. And it's crazy the amount of shortage there is in the world. And so I as I was a student, I didn't have any experience, and I had no clue what I was doing. I would just reach out to people and say, hey, I saw you just changed your, let's say I just saw you were a jacket company and you started making COVID masks. Like, that's amazing. Thanks for standing out and being like a community leader. And that's all you need to say. And right away they say, wow, this is actually a human that recognized me. And it's such a great way to start a relationship. So that's another one to add.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That, and knowing, and, not feeling, like, you're unqualified to also give those encouragements. I think, that does step. And I think you're absolutely right. Encouragement, especially now, is, something that we can give a lot and not feel weird about it or anything. So I guess moving on here, this question is sort of a combination of a question that I got from a student prior to this this call, but it is, I think it's great. So besides the skills in using this social media platform, LinkedIn, what are some key sort of qualities to develop? So one, when they hit the application market for new jobs, they really stick out or just have an advantage. So what are some qualities to develop? This could be in, I guess, through the certain activities that you take part in during the summer, but it's sort of a broad question, but I think it's good besides, this online platform. I guess, Natalie, I think
I'll start this one.
You're up, yeah.
Well, kind of going back to what I said earlier about like projects and like doing very timely tasks that are outside of, say, an internship. So one of the people that we were going to hire as a social media intern, she goes to Stanford, which is very San Francisco. This whole conversation is going to be very San Francisco. I'm going to preface that. So she goes to Stanford, and she had done marketing internships at a couple startups. They weren't necessarily like very similar to 500 startups as a venture capital firm. But what I did notice was she was the business development lead for Stanford's business organization. which meant that she had worked with venture capitalists before, and she actually listed the venture capitalists that she had done partnerships with. It's stuff like that that I think really helps people stand out. So even if you're working at, say, a student club or you're just doing a project, if you're not able to reach that specific industry or segment because there's a barrier to entry, the venture capital is very much this way. There's a huge barrier to entry in venture capital. It's seen as an industry that you go into later on in life. You don't necessarily have a lot of young people. Although at 500, we actually do have a lot of young people, which is contrary. But one of the things that really helped her was finding projects in which you were working with those types of industries. That way you were able to get, internships and whatnot in it. I also saw this a lot with people who wanted to work at larger tech companies. Larger tech companies, it's really hard to go get an internship at a larger tech company unless you've worked at a larger tech company before. One way that people would get around this is they would do projects at their school and with different social clubs where they would work with those big tech companies. One of my friends ended up being like a Bumble ambassador and threw some parties for Bumble. And it actually ended up helping her because then when she graduated, she had a full-time offer from Bumble. So that's kind of some other things. I'd also say too, and this is a little bit past the application phase, but being a really good interviewee is really important. And that was a skill that I think I was naturally relatively good at. But I would, a lot of times when I left internships, I would ask sort of my supervisor, like, what do you think like really sealed the deal? And like you guys bringing me on? And almost always they said your interview. Like you were able to seal the deal. You were able to showcase that you had done it before. You were very personable. Now that I've interviewed a lot of interns, because I've always had social media interns since I first started, that's kind of for me what ends up being like a big differentiating factor is how well do they interview? Are they calm? Are they able to explain very well? Might be also because I work in marketing, so you have to be really good at communicating, but I would say that's another skill you definitely want to develop.
Yeah, those are some great tips. Joel, do you have any thoughts on this?
I think Natalie listed most of them. I would add one last one would be if you can figure out your niche early on and find a way to interview people to some capacity, I think that's always such an easy, low-hanging fruit, kind of great way to start. And an example would be if you want to eventually get into marketing and you have a particular niche that you're interested in, start an article, podcast, or video interview series where instead of kind of needing to do your own internship, you're just kind of building your own kind of education cycle where instead of going for coffee, you're interviewing people. And it's a lot easier to kind of get those people to say yes to meeting with you because they notice that you're working on something, that you're building something to also showcase who they are. And I think that's what Natalie and I kind of learned on the LinkedIn platform was that you can kind of be creative about how you build relationships. It doesn't always need to be a phone call or meeting for coffee. You can kind of create or bring them into your projects. It's just about kind of identifying what that project is and what your end goal is.
Yeah, that's great. The independent project, I think, can't be underlooked. That just like recommendation podcast or being creative, like you said, sort of relating back. Now's the time as students before we do work for a company someday and have sort of more of a constraint on, what can we post and what things to engage in. Mm-hmm. All right. Yeah. So I've got two more questions here on our list, and then we'll toss it to the audience for more. This next question here is sort of a post-COVID question. We know that eventually things are going to open up, and there'll be networking events that will go on sometime in the future. What are some tips that you know, as students, we can develop in engaging into conversations, whether that be with fellow peers at a networking event, or whether it's at, say, a firm and you're in a case competition and then there's a networking event afterwards. So yeah, I guess what are some key tips there? Joel, do you want to start us there?
Sure. I don't know if I have the best answers for this, but I think my points would be, if there is a speaker or a program, message those people beforehand to see if they want to meet. Hey, so-and-so, I noticed you're giving a 20-minute talk at this class. If you're in town for the day, would you want to go for coffee before or after? Right away, that kind of personalizes who they are, and kind of, even if they're busy, it's just a great way to show initiative. And I think the second one would be a habit I try to do after you've planned events, and I think Natalie can speak to this, is just thank the hosts and the organizers and the people behind the scenes, whether they're dropping off food or they're the moderator. I think just being appreciative of the event. And then the third one would be host your own. I think that's sometimes the most fun way to do it, is that if you say don't like the professional events that your club's hosting or your school's hosting, like, who's holding you back from, emailing some friends and saying, can we host our own? And that's kind of that creativity mindset I'd encourage, is that if you go to an event and you're like, this is kind of slow, or the speakers aren't relevant, why can't you do something like this, a webinar or something different? And yeah, that would be the third point.
Yeah, awesome. Natalie?
Yeah, I had to smile when Joel was like, message some friends, host an event. And I was like, do what Joel did with me. But yeah, everything that Joel said, I think, to kind of add a little bit of maybe a different perspective to what Joel said as well. I used to suffer really bad from social anxiety. And so I would force myself to go to meetups in Santa Monica, which, for people who are not from LA traffic's really bad. Where I went to college, not very near Santa Monica, so it was a trek. It was about 2.5 hours round trip driving, so long. But what I would end up doing, because I had, social anxiety, is a lot of times you go to these networking events, especially if you go by yourself, or even when you go with another student, you may feel like you kind of stick out. And I definitely felt like I stuck out a lot at these networking events. And so what I ended up starting to do is I would message the organizers beforehand, and I would say, do you need any volunteers? Do you need anybody to help with check-ins? Do you need anybody to help set up chairs? Do you need, pretty much anything at all? And I actually ended up joining sort of the volunteer team at a lot of different meetups in Santa Monica. One of which was Startup Grind, which is actually a really global organization that now actually have 500 we work with, which is really, interesting. But being especially check-in is really helpful. It gives you a very natural place to introduce yourself and your name, but it also means that you know every single person at that event. So it's great to sort of help kickstart that initial awkward phase where you're like, oh, how's it going? How's the punch? It gets kind of uncomfortable. Volunteering and, having those natural moments that you're already introducing yourself can kind of help ease the tension. And it also is great practice for you, to be able to practice, your 30-second pitch of who you are, to be able to really craft how you want to be known. So what even do you introduce yourself as? I remember I would, test that out a lot. I would say that's probably my only tip in addition to what Joel said.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I think I've never heard of, that one tip of messaging the organizations beforehand, and just, even if it's a small role, just to be within that realm. And then, I mean, you have also access probably to the speakers afterwards or beforehand, and you can have one-on-one, chats with them. So yeah, awesome. Okay. Yeah. Last question from me. and this is sort of a clincher, is I'm curious to know just your top encouragement for university students at this time, and just as they're currently battling with COVID-19. What are some top encouragements that you would like to give? Joel, you want to start?
Sure. I would just say it's the best time to start a new habit or build something right now. You're cooped up at home. You're not supposed to be, out in public. And so how can you spin that in a positive light to say, hey, I have this extra time, instead of maybe watching Netflix or wasting time? How can I build a new habit, or how can I build a new idea that could maybe be something that's ready to roll out when things do turn to a new normal? And then I think the second one would be just encouraging the start of like a new documentation process. I think when you're applying to internships, or when you're meeting out, or when you're reaching out to people or starting your LinkedIn, keep a Google sheet or a journal, or a friend to hold you accountable, just to make sure that when you're starting to make steps, even if they're not working, to still see that as progress, because any learning is good learning as long as you're, moving forward. And so get comfortable testing, even if things don't work. Know that you're still stretching yourself and you're getting outside of your comfort zone. And ultimately that will move you closer to being able to be more employable and to be a better team player, and so many things that come out of that. So there's my encouragement.
Great. Thanks. Natalie?
That's hard to follow. So I think, kind of to take it back, what I do on a day-to-day basis. So we are, like I said, a venture capital firm. We've invested in over 5,000 founders. And in 2019, we were the most active global venture capital, early stage venture capital firm. What that means is we come in contact with a lot of founders who are also changing everything due to COVID-19. And I think that there's one attribute in young people that founders just perpetually have at like every age, which is when things get really tough is actually the moment that they innovate the most. That's when, you can take the biggest risk, you can make the biggest change. I can't tell you though, the number of people I've talked to recently that are like, I've been putting this off for a while now, and I'm just, I think now's the time. I was just talking with somebody this morning about it, how she was like, I've been putting off redoing my website. And I was like, just redo it. You have time. I think that during this time, it's really easy to get discouraged and to honestly like just mourn what we've lost, right? Like there are plenty of plans that I had that now I'm like, I was planning on going to Vancouver in May. And now obviously I'm in Southern California. But I think there's also, a mindset change that is really beneficial for students, for founders, for people who, are definitely trying to do new things almost every day. And that's like, how can I turn this setback more into a setup? Like, how can I continue to innovate on what I'm doing? What are the things that I could be doing that are, either COVID-19 relief related, or are more in a lot of these industries that are actually being positively affected by COVID-19 and stay at home. So I think the main thing for me in terms of encouragement is really to kind of change your mindset. A lot of people are like, oh, my life is on pause now. What's nice about being able to work with founders that you realize is life doesn't actually pause. Like life is still going on. And so I think, finding the opportunity and having more of that abundance mindset is what ultimately post COVID-19, you're going to come out of, a time where a lot of people just held everything on pause. You would be the one who actually continued to progress regardless of circumstances.
Yeah. That's awesome. Great. Okay. So for those, I mean, that's the end of my questions. So for those attending the call, feel free to just use the chat function. You can type it to everyone, or myself, Natalie, or Joel, just questions. And I'll read them off and we can go through those. So while you guys are doing that, just one thing came to mind that I guess we can just chat about briefly, is just the use of hashtags on like LinkedIn and posts. I know I made up my post last week, and Joel recommended, hey, why don't you try some hashtags? Let's get some student voices in there. I'm pretty sure I used a Zoom hashtag. So yeah. What does the hashtag feature do? I guess, Joel, I think you want to answer.
I'm going to give it to Natalie. I think
Okay.
she knows this.
You got it.
I love how we keep passing it off to each other. That's incredible. So in terms of hashtags are relatively recent on LinkedIn, given like the entire tenure that LinkedIn has been around. And LinkedIn really created these hashtags because of what they call the Robin Hood algorithm. So what that means is that the algorithm tries to promote smaller, very engaged communities. So what hashtags allow you to do is it allows you to tap into those smaller communities. So a lot of people ask me, do I do broad hashtags? Do I do specific hashtags? You kind of do a mix of both, whatever type of community you think is going to best engage and benefit from your post. There are some specific campaign hashtags as well. So whether they were started by LinkedIn creators or they were actually started by the editors, so say Student Voices. Student Voices was a campaign and really kind of like a movement when LinkedIn campus editors first came onto the scene. So I was one of the first 23 campus editors, and I sort of helped with all of Southern California and then more specifically USC when the program got built out. Student Voices was an initiative by the editors to get more students to write on the platform and to get their voices heard. So that's an example of one that isn't necessarily like community driven, but is something that's really good to know if you're trying to expand your reach. In terms of number of hashtags, usually anywhere from like 3 to 7 works really well. LinkedIn is also very anti spam. So you can do too many hashtags, you can do too many tags, you can post too much, unlike some of the other platforms where they're a little bit more forgiving.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. Like there's always that, I think there's a 200 or a character limit on post I've recognized a few times. Yeah, I'm not seeing any questions at the moment. But yeah, I guess there's, I think one question that we didn't fully tackle on my sheet. So I guess I can bring that up for the time being. This is sort of related to resumes. And like you said, Joel, I think the sort of printing out paper resumes, that sort of stage is going more online these days. But the question is, like, what are some key things on what should be included, avoided, to stand out for the resume itself? Yeah, Joel, you wanna?
Yeah, I would say try and include a metric or a KPI as much as you can. What that means is any role that you're doing, try and include a number or percentage or a metric behind what you achieved. A good analogy for this would be anyone can write a business paper about, any topic, but in that essay, are you actually able to convey like the specifics and the key details of that topic? So similar thing in a resume, instead of writing a fluffy line, try and find out what key things you achieved in that role. And then that helps validate that to the person who's reading the resume. Another thing I would include would be try and, if you haven't done this, add a personal URL for your LinkedIn so that when you're posting that on your resume, people can just look up linkedin.com/ Natalie Riso. The standard way that they give it to you is it's like a humble jumble of numbers and words. So try and personalize that and put that on your resume. And then the third one I think would be if you do have a unique project or creative endeavor that aligns with that role you're going after, try and include that, because I think that's a great relationship builder when they look up your website or when they look up your podcast or a student club. They can see that it kind of sets you apart. So yeah.
Totally. Natalie, do you have anything just to add at the end there, or?
Yeah, in terms of resume, love the URL thing. That is my actual URL. So hit the nail on the head. Yeah, I would say in terms of resume stuff as well, I think really tailoring your resume every single time that you apply, using the same keywords. Also, when you apply to a big company, it's going to be very different than when you apply to a small company. Big companies will use more programs to just sift through resumes, and this is true if you apply using your LinkedIn as well for specific keywords. So it's something to keep in mind, versus a smaller company will either A, have more time to look over it, or you'll actually have a human looking over it. What this means is don't try to get crazy with like your resume outlines or anything like that, or do things on LinkedIn where your LinkedIn is astronomically long, because it'll either A, mess up whatever's reading it, if it's like in a weird outline on your resume. This happens a lot actually at big companies, especially when people ironically apply to LinkedIn. You'll automatically get disqualified, so something to note. But if you also have way too long of a LinkedIn, or if you're writing way too long underneath each section, people more than likely will just skim over things. So make sure that that top bullet point, or whatever you're using, is the definite like meaty part of your experience that relates to whatever you're applying for. I will admit that when I look at resumes, I usually only look at the top bullet point of each experience, and I probably look at only the first top 2 or 3 experiences to give people an idea. It's not that I don't want to learn more about you. It's that I have to go through 300 resumes. So I think just having that mindset of like who's actually going to be processing that, whether it's a resume or it's the copy of your LinkedIn, just kind of be mindful of that.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. I guess, Natalie, you have to leave us here in 2 minutes. So thank you. You can log off whenever you need to. I do have one question, just from an audience member. She's wondering, from either of your guys' experience or just knowledge, what's the number one mistake that people can make on LinkedIn or networking face-to-face? Natalie, before you leave, I don't know.
Before I go, I will answer very quickly.
Okay.
In terms of the number one mistake, I mean, there's a couple pitfalls we've mentioned of asking for the phone call too early. I think one that we haven't mentioned is, especially when like creating LinkedIn content or trying to like build your personal brand, starting to network, I think the first inclination is to talk about your student experience, because that's the experience you're having every single day. One of the reasons why I think I stood out from a lot of students when I was in college was I tried to look more at the macro. So even if I was talking about something that's only students would deal with, I try to look at the emotion of it. Well, is this something that maybe people later on would have? I think a lot of students will be a little bit too zoomed in into sort of the college bubble. And this especially happens with a lot of kids actually at American universities like USC, because it's like it's the American college experience. But I think if you're able to kind of zoom out a little bit and say, what's collective experiences that we're all having, that's something that's a lot easier for people to talk to. And I think if a student came up to me and initially just started talking about like, oh, well, started going in depth about like student clubs they're a part of, if it wasn't exactly pertinent to the conversation I was having with them, I would almost be like, okay, I don't really know where to take this from here. Like that's great. it's good that you're involved, but I just don't know how to respond. So I think kind of taking things out in the macro. I do have to leave, unfortunately. I do have another meeting I have to go to, but I want to say thank you for hosting this. Joel, it's great to see you. And if anybody wants to connect with me on LinkedIn, they're more than welcome to do so.
Awesome. Thank you for joining us, Natalie. Yeah, have a great next meeting or wherever you need to go to. So
thank you. See you, everybody.